Have a fruitful afternoon all. Dear participants, we have the third and fourth sessions across our academic journey today. The third session of the day is on extensive versus intensive reading, and it will be handled by Dr. Anshoo Sharma. This goes on live between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m., followed by the fourth session to be rendered by Dr. Sasisegaran on comprehension strategy and inferential reading from 4:15 p.m. to 5:15 p.m. We wish to remind the participants at this point in time that 80% of the attendance is required to earn participation certificates. In addition to this, submitting the feedback form towards the end of every day is also to be taken good care of for the consideration. Now we are on to the third session. I'm Indepth, Assistant Professor of English at Sri Ramakrishna Engineering College, Coimbatore, privileged to introduce the speaker of the session unto you all. We have a vibrant speaker, Dr. Anshoo Sharma, Head Department of English, Government College, Chaksu, in the state of Rajasthan. She has 22 years of experience in facilitating the undergraduate and postgraduate learners. She was awarded the postdoctoral fellowship by the University Grants Commission. She has valuable literary and research publications to her credit. I'm sure that this session will also add to the existing reservoir of knowledge. Now on to the speaker. May I now request the speaker to handle the session. Ma'am, over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Indusudhan. Am I audible? If you could just...
Yeah, right. It's clear, ma'am. You're audible.
Okay,
your voice
fine.
is clearly set.
Okay. Thank you, Indusudhan, for a wonderful introduction. And I am from Rajasthan, Jaipur. And as Indusudhan has introduced me, today I'm going to talk about extensive versus intensive reading. Before I begin, I'll just make a short... I just wanted to make a statement. Firstly, I want to thank ELTAI for inviting me and President Dr. Sanjay Arora for inviting me for this session. But at the same time, I would also like to make clear that I have been given a very short notice for this session. So if there are any shortcomings, they are all mine. And if you find something interesting and valuable, then the credit goes to this platform, which gave me this opportunity to speak with you, all of you. Now, as you can see on the screen, the topic today is extensive versus intensive reading. I think most of us are well aware generally as to what extensive reading and intensive reading means. Before I begin, I would just like to, open up the discussion. And as you can see on the PPT screens, what is reading all about? Why do we read? And what are the basic components of reading? I would like the audience, if somebody could, begin by addressing these questions. I have opened the option where attendees may request to speak. So would anybody like to, just comment upon what is reading about? Because we are going back to the basics and we are trying to find out as to why the reading habits are dwindling in the present times and how we can, bring about, young readers to start reading and taking interest in reading again. Anyone? It's a very simple question. Okay. Nobody? What is reading all about? What is reading? Reading, technically speaking, it is a simple act of reading the written word which is printed on the paper. And it is a multifaceted process that it involves word recognition, it involves comprehension, it involves fluency, and it also involves motivation. And it is, you can say, the act of looking at the printed word. Like, for example, now at the moment on your screens, you have this printed word, and we try to understand and comprehend as to what this text is saying. That is what reading is all about. And reading is also, you can say, when we read the text and we try to understand, for example, if it's a story or it's a poem or it's a play or a novel. And then from there we come on to the questions of as to why do we read. What is the reason for reading? That's pretty simple, because students maybe read wanting to read because of career options, because they want to look for career opportunities, or for their study purposes, or simply for pleasure. That is what we read for. And as parents, as teachers, we should try as far as possible to encourage the habit of reading. Also, reading is a very useful tool for acquiring of language, of acquiring better understanding, and it also has a very positive effect on what you can say, our vocabulary, our knowledge, and then at the same time it improves our writing skills, and also our grammar. And while writing, along with writing, of course, we cannot ignore punctuation. So a beneficial effect takes place when we indulge in the act of reading, and it affects our speech, and as well as our writing skills, they get improved. And lastly, I think good reading texts, they introduce us or expose to us some very interesting topics which can stimulate discussions, and which can also excite our imagination and maybe help us become writers ourselves. Now, when we talk about reading, there are basically two categories of reading, two kinds of reading. One is oral, and the other is silent reading. And today, the topic that we are discussing is going to concentrate upon the silent reading, which includes, again, which has four components, which are skimming, scanning, extensive reading, and intensive reading. Now, what is extensive reading? Would anybody like to answer me? Anybody from the audience would like to share as to what extensive reading is about?
Ma'am, and we find several responses in the chat box too, ma'am.
I can box Sindhu. Where do I do allow both public and private messages? Should I click on that?
It's simply that chat option, ma'am. If you click on that, we'll find the messages in.
I have allow both public and private messages. That's what I can see. Enable chat is on. I cannot see the, like,
Ma'am, we find the messages in the chat box. Could you just click on the chat box, ma'am? We find the messages floating in.
I can see enable. Okay, I can see the chats. Should I click on that?
Yeah, right.
Yes. Now I can see. Yes.
Participants, we solicit your patience.
Okay. Yes, I saw a few responses. They were perfectly They were correct. And extensive reading basically, yes, I can see Vamsi Krishna saying extensive reading, which involves learners reading text for enjoyment and to develop general reading skills. Perfect. It refers the reading for joy. This approach supports reading as much material in your target language as humanly possible. This way, it supports claim you will be exposed to the widest range of vocabulary and grammatical structures. All of this is supposed to make you a better language learner and help you on the way to fluency. Perfect. Vamsi Krishna has given a perfect definition of what what I yes, can is it visible? Is the slide visible?
We get it, ma'am. We get it for you, ma'am.
Yeah. Yes. Is the slide visible now?
Yes, ma'am, it is visible. You should please proceed, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Now, extensive reading is something that is done for joy. It gives us joy, it gives us pleasure. It is over a long period of time, and there are varied texts that we indulge in. For example, magazines or newspapers or comic books for young children. What is, on the other hand, intensive reading all about? Now, maybe I'll just click on the chats and find out. Yes. Anybody who would like to tell me something about what intensive reading is about? Anyways, intensive reading, in contrast, is all about detailed focus on a construction of reading texts from different topics and genres. And it is, you can say it is concentrating upon specific needs of the reader. For example, it can be anything about specifically about science, or maybe nursing, or maybe as literature students, it may be about reading English literature about particular texts. That is what intensive reading is about, and usually it is done within the classrooms, whereas extensive reading is something that we have, you do it for pleasure, maybe outside the classroom, in the library or at home. And also, in case of intensive reading, there is more focus upon language. Now, as you can see on your screens, we are talking about, when we talk about reading, it includes word recognition, comprehension, and fluency, which I have already, in the initial part I had talked about. Now, in before your screens, you can see that there is identify the given text, whether it is extensive or intensive. I have taken up 3 examples, and I would just like to take one by one, and I would just give you a few seconds to read the examples and give me your feedback, please. Now, example 1, if you wish, I can read it aloud for you. Protecting your skin from the radiant heat of the sun is the need of the hour, and nothing is better than sunscreen lotions in summers. They are an absolute must have in your summer skincare routine. But before rushing to pick the right one for yourself, do know your skin type. Not only do they protect you from the direct rays, but also give nourishment to your skin. Summers can turn into the toughest seasons to pass by without sunscreen lotions. Could I have some responses to this, please?
We have got a response from Vamsi Krishna. Could you unmute yourself, ma'am?
Yes, I can see. She's talking about intensive reading involves learners reading in detail with specific learning aims. Yeah, I have gone through it. I just have moved on from there. That's a perfect answer. Now, this one, but the sample that is there before your screens, I would like to know it falls under what category? Anyone? I would like to hear your responses. Tarabji says this is intensive. Anybody else? Aruna Devi KK says extensive. Extensive reading is general English. Extensive. Another response says extensive. Yes. This is an example of extensive reading because here you are, this as is very obvious is an ad campaign. And usually we have ad campaigns in magazines and newspapers. And magazines and newspapers are things that are, we go through them just for general reading. It is not for any, it's, not for intensive reading. It is for light reading. Thank you very much for your responses. Now we have another example, the second example before your screens. Please read it. I'll read it aloud. It's a short one. The Oedipal complex, also known as the Oedipus complex, is a term used by Sigmund Freud in his theory of psychosexual stages of development to describe a child's feelings of desire for his or her opposite sex parent and jealousy and anger towards his or her same-sex parent. Could you tell me where would you place this example? Does it fall under? Amalan says it's intensive. Anybody else? Yes, Anil Ramchandra Patil says it's intensive reading. Anna says it's intensive. Yes, perfectly. You've got on the idea because this particular sample that I have taken is, very clear example of a deep, in-depth reading, which would require a knowledge of many things. Besides, you can see psychology, the person Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalyst. We'll need information about him. We'll need an in-depth reading talking about so many different things, which would not be, something which young children or young learners would be aware of. So for this, a lot of secondary material, a lot of in-depth reading would be needed for understanding this text. And we would need intensive reading for example number 2. Now before your screens, we have the third example. I'll quickly read it. It's an excerpt from a text, a short story. And it says, Rosemary Fell was not exactly beautiful. No, you wouldn't have called her beautiful. Pretty? Well, if you took her to pieces. But why be so cruel as to take anyone to pieces? She was young, brilliant, extremely modern, exquisitely well-dressed, amazingly well-read in the newest of the new books. And her parties were the most delicious mixture of the really important people and artists, quaint creatures, discoveries of hers, some of them too terrifying for words, but others quite presentable and amusing. Now, I would like to see where would you place this, under which category, intensive or extensive? I can see Ramani sir is saying skimming. Valsa Kumar says it's intensive. Amalan says it's extensive. Surajit says, yes, I can see the house seems to be divided, and that's exactly what I was looking for. Yes, this particular piece falls under both intensive as well as extensive reading, because a short story can be read for pleasure. It can be read for, just to pass your time, or just, as for example, if you are at your homes, or if you're waiting at the airport, or if you're waiting at the station. this would be a perfect reading material. But at the same time, on the other hand, if you look at it as a literary piece, specifically for literature students, this would not fall under extensive reading. Rather, it would fall under intensive reading, because we'll have to read the short story in depth. We'll have to know about why the writer wrote it, what the characters are talking about, what is the writer trying to convey, and there would be certain questions that we would need to address and look for the answers within the text. So this particular sample would fall under both extensive as well as intensive reading. So I hope with this small icebreaker, the things are almost already quite clear. Now, before I move on into this formal, discussion about what intensive reading and extensive reading is all about. Before the screens now, you can see I have put the definition of extensive reading, and you can see all that we have already covered, all the points which the audience has raised. It is there. It is a reading text for enjoyment, because extensive reading is something that is kind of a casual reading, which is performed for either pleasure or for gaining general understanding of a topic on which the students are interested, and they can be interested or engrossed in reading a magazine or a newspaper. And in this approach, the students read very long texts and refer to various supporting study material only to enjoy the reading and gaining a better understanding of the concept. So reading text for enjoyment, developing general reading skills, and reading large amount of material for general comprehension is what extensive reading is all about. Here I would just like to mention one point, that extensive reading is something which should be encouraged amongst young readers, because this is something which sets the right pattern. It sets the right mood. It's takes you in the right direction and takes you towards reading intensively. So extensive reading is something which we as parents and teachers should try as far as possible to arouse the interest of our young learners to indulge in extensive reading. Then another thing for extensive reading, when we talk about extensive reading, usually the text that we would take up for extensive reading would be rather simple. They would not be very technical. They would not be something very difficult. They would be something simpler. And again, it would depend upon the readers, the target audience, as to what kind of interests that they have. It is something which is individual. It is something which depends on the person doing the reading, not something that is superimposed by us as parents or teachers. It is understood that the individual, that the child or that the student can select the book or material of his choice and the topic which interests him or her. And this kind of reading usually does not have any kind of follow-up discussion in the classroom. It is something that is done silently at a personal level. And extensive reading is just to encourage the habit of reading in students and to make them voracious readers. And this is what all at the moment that this FDP that we are having, that 8-day brainstorming that we are having, we basically the target is, the idea is to increase the reading habits of the younger generation. With this, I shall move on to the next slide. As it is there visible on your screens, it's the definition of intensive reading. And here you can see we focus on the construction of, now this is, these are, I will be talking about the differences between the two, but when we look at the definition, because we've just gone through the definition of the extensive reading, the moment we look at both the definitions simultaneously, we can see the differences also. Because in extensive reading, we are not talking about the technicalities of the text. We are not looking for the exact meanings of all the words. But here in the very first line, you can see when we try to define intensive reading, it focuses on the construction of the reading text. So this becomes a little technical. Intensive reading becomes a little more serious. It becomes a little more technical, and the focus is on the construction of the reading text. And you can see that it can be understood as a method which requires a very in-depth study of a text with the objective of getting its literary or linguistic meaning. Literary as well as linguistic. Both the upper meaning as well as the inner meaning of the text. For example, as is the case of literature, right? Then the second thing is that we use shorter text to extract detailed information. In case of extensive reading, you have an expansive kind of material that you go through, whereas in case of intensive reading, as you can see, it's shorter text that we concentrate upon, and we try to take out all the detailed information that we can about that particular text that we have with us. Then understanding and interpreting texts. Now here it means what the author is trying to say, the central idea. What is the aim of the author? We have to understand that also. And what is the significance? What exactly the author is trying to tell us in that text is what we try to look for when we are doing an intensive reading of a given text. So the aim is to extract the meaning, to extract the essence, the meaning of that particular text. At the same time, we try to learn the grammar and the syntax rules. That is extremely important. We look at the text as a whole. We look at the grammar, we look at the syntax rule. And further, for intensive reading, we have to understand the gist and the subject matter of the text completely. We cannot afford to let go of certain parts or ignore certain parts. When we have decided to do intensive reading, then we have to do it completely. And also, we understand what the author is trying to say through the text. And the main focus of the learner is on the language rules. Not only on the text, of course, that is understood. But here, there is concentration upon the language aspect as well. In case of extensive reading, that was not so much of a focus. But here, in case of intensive reading, we have to focus upon the language aspect of language, syntax, grammar, vocabulary, punctuation, everything, the word meanings, everything is looked into in detail. Now, I hope the screen is clear. Now here, as I was talking about the definitions, now during the definitions, discussion of the definition itself, I had said that most of the differences are quite obvious. But here on the screens, I have shared a detailed comparative analysis of both extensive reading and intensive reading. This is something very interesting, and it makes things very clear in one go. You can see here, I have taken up the different, these on the left hand side, you can see divided the different aspects and how in both extensive and intensive readings they differ. The first one is the meaning. As in the definition, when I was talking about the definition, here it's there before your screens. There's a long text and a large amount of material read for general understanding. These are the key words, which make all the difference. This extensive reading is all about general understanding. There's no in-depth reading in this, just to get an overview of what the text is talking about, whether it's a magazine, for example, a newspaper. Sometimes you just sift through it quickly and you look for some areas which hold your interest, and maybe you will read that very carefully. But otherwise, newspapers are just kind of skimmed through. We don't go on concentrating upon a particular text and go into doing an in-depth reading on it. Whereas in case of intensive reading, it's a short text which is to be read very carefully, and that is done in order to gain as much understanding as possible. And in case of extensive reading, it is not necessary that the reader understands each and every word. But in case of intensive reading, the students are expected to understand everything that they read and to be able to answer detailed vocabulary and comprehensive questions if they are asked by the teachers in the classroom. So this is the difference between the two. Then intensive reading, earlier I had mentioned that extensive reading helps, moving into intensive reading. But interestingly, it is vice versa as well. It works both ways. Intensive reading it helps, do extensive reading, but at the same time, the extensive reading must be practiced in order to be able to handle authentic materials. Now, this is the catch. From going into in-depth reading, once we are masters of that, then extensive reading becomes much easier. You understand the text even better. Even with light, if you go through it, if you sift through it very passingly, even then things become very clear, and it in turn helps us to understand, to handle the authentic materials more easily. Then authentic material, initially we keep it short. We don't take big bites. We take smaller bites to understand the text better. But if we try to take the full text simultaneously, then there's a possibility that it might demotivate the students. So we have to be very careful. When we are initiating the young learners, we have to be very careful as to how we handle the text, how we move about from extensive reading to intensive reading, and vice versa. And the most important thing here, which I would like to mention, is that we have to set strategies. And one interesting strategy is to have pre-questions set. When we introduce a text for intensive reading, then the best thing to do is that we have some pre-questions for the students. And also, while we do the reading in the classroom, we can always, for example, if we take a text for intensive reading and we read it out aloud in the class, we can, after every line, we can ask a question. We can pose a question to the students, and it makes things easier to understand. The comprehension level of the students improves. Then you see, the second point that I have talked about is the nature. The nature of extensive reading. Usually, extensive reading is a supplementary kind of a reading, whereas intensive reading is a comprehensive kind of a reading, which is a detailed reading, which I have already mentioned. And it is concerned with simply decoding the written word. On the other hand, intensive reading is comprehensive, as it takes up the chosen text in detail. A few more differences. The extensive reading, it involves reading of a number of books on similar concept or subject, while reading of intensive reading involves reading of a book again and again to extract its literal meaning. Again, from the first point that I had talked about, that you read a wide number of material in case of extensive reading on a similar idea or a similar subject to improve upon your understanding of that subject. While in case of intensive reading, you read a single book, or you read a single passage, or you read a single story and try to extract the maximum number of meanings, to extract maximum number of language learning that you can do through the given text. Then the next difference between the two is use of dictionary. In case of extensive reading, you do not require a dictionary. When you sit down to do casual reading, there's no need to go and refer to each and every word that you have not understood, because that takes away from the pleasure of reading. And extensive reading is basically joyful reading. On the other hand, in case of intensive reading, because you need an in-depth understanding of the text, it is extremely important to use the dictionary and use it as per the need of the child or the student or the candidate. The next difference, you can see that extensive reading is helpful in developing reading fluency and range. This is again a very, very important point, because the more you read, the better readers you become. It's a very simple, two-way equation. Because the fluency, what does fluency mean? Your speed, how fast you can read, how quickly you can understand, without going into the details, how one after the other, how quickly you can grasp the meaning without going into too many details. So that is what extensive reading helps you with. On the other hand, the intensive reading, it develops reading skills. Again, this is the technical aspect which makes you masters of the language, which makes you, when you are referring to the dictionary, in the dictionary you don't only have the word meanings, you also have the pronunciation aspect. So when you are doing intensive reading, not only your reading habit improves, your fluency also improves, but your vocabulary improves, your grammar improves, your comprehension improves, your writing skills improve, your speech also, because when you look at the dictionary, when you are trying to understand, and when you go through those how to pronounce different words, you become more confident. So intensive reading not only improves upon your comprehension, it also improves upon your speech skills, on your speaking skills, as well as your writing skills. Now, going on to the principles of extensive reading. I hope through the differences, I enjoyed doing the differences, because it made the concept of these two things pretty simple to understand. And especially, the things have been put out very clearly, that intensive reading improves your analytical and critical skills, whereas extensive reading basically improves your fluency. It improves your speed of reading and enjoying your text. Now, coming on to the principles of extensive reading, it's there again on your screens. I have put down 7 or 8 points which are quite clear in themselves. Like the first one, you can see students read a great deal quite quickly. I've already gone through it. I'm not going to repeat it. That is at least 150 to 200 words a minute. That's the kind of speed that you have in case of extensive reading. Second is that the reading material is relatively easy. This again is a very important point, because for extensive reading, you will not take up a technical text, you will not take up a scientific text, you will not take up theory, you will just take up simpler reading materials which can give you the kind of a hang of the language. Then non-familiar, less familiar language hampers students' fluency. This is one aspect of extensive reading, because if the words are difficult, for example, even in newspapers, even in certain, for example, I am from Rajasthan, and usually people are not very fluent as far as English is concerned, and they prefer to read newspapers like maybe the Times of India. Somehow the language of Times of India, in comparison to the language of the Hindu or the Deccan Herald, is you can see that there's a difference in the language. The English used in those papers are slightly more technical, a little more difficult for for the young readers. So less familiar words, non-familiar words can sometimes cause a kind of hampering in the fluency. Then the choice of text is, again, it is not something which is imposed by the teachers, but it is something which is according to the requirement of the student, the interest of the student. It is up to him or her as to what she or he chooses to read. Then there is a wide variety of genres and topics to choose from. The focus is not singular. It is you can take up anything. The choice is yours. It's a garden out there, and you can pick the flowers that you are interested in. Then the sixth point, extremely important, that the reading is for pleasure and either to gain a general information or for general understanding. And then reading is individual and silent. Individual, it's not a group reading. You are not reading it aloud. You are doing silent reading. You are reading to yourself. It's for your own perception. It is for your own enjoyment. And the teacher, what the teacher does is at the most to guide and monitor. If the student needs, the child needs some help, then the teacher is there to help the young learners. Then what are the benefits of extensive reading? This is something, uh, why you do extensive reading. Well, where is the need to do extensive reading? Why not straight away? We've seen the comparison between intensive and extensive reading. Intensive reading is far, far ahead because it is giving you much more. It's making you better readers, it's making you better speakers, it's making you better writers. Then why do extensive reading at all, except of course that it gives you joy, it gives you pleasure. But here you can see there are certain points which have been mentioned by experts. There's an language expert, language teacher by the name of Kyron Donay. I have taken these points from him, and he has talked about these, benefits of extensive reading. And he says that we become better readers when we indulge in extensive reading, because through extensive reading we learn from our primary focus is not on the meaning, rather on the language of the text, and it is pretty obvious that extensive reading helps students become better readers. And he has also quoted, I'll just read it out quickly, by Richard Day. There has been a research by Richard Day, amongst many others, that shows that we learn to read by reading. Now that's an interesting concept, that we learn to read by reading. The more language the students read, the better readers they become. So one big benefit, the more you read, the better learners you become. You learn more vocabulary. For example, when you are reading a wide array of texts, then there are certain words that are, lying in your minds, unused, but the more you read, the wider range you have, then that passive vocabulary comes to the fore. Your vocabulary improves. You start using those words which are lying dormant in your minds. Then it also improves your writing. Your writing skills become better, because I'm not talking about doing some very serious writing, but generally, when you read extensively, your writing skills also improve. And this is because, as the previous point says, your passive vocabulary comes to the fore, and also through extensive reading, the range of language, the range that you're exposed to, that benefits you, that helps you. Then it improves overall language competence and comprehension in shorter time. It's kind of an overview, like a spaceship. From top, you're looking at things, and you have a wider range, that kind of thing. That's how I look upon it. Your extensive reading, something from top, you're looking at it, and you have a wider, view of things, and in a shorter time, you can, like the higher you are, the more you can see, something like that. So it helps that way, and also we become motivated for self-study. Why we become motivated for self-study is because we are doing that kind of reading which gives us pleasure. And anything that gives us joy, anything that gives us pleasure, we want to repeat. Okay. Nowadays, like for example, during the lockdown, we were all homebound, and the only way out was the online portals. And what were we indulging in? Most of us, we either improved upon our skills, like for example, some people started painting, some people started learning how to dance, to embroider, to stitch, and of course online shopping. So now that is, I noticed it in many people. It gave them pleasure, and they started, it became a kind of a circle. They shopped more and more because it was giving them pleasure. So same thing with this, because extensive reading is done in the areas that are already interesting you, that are already captivating you, that are already giving you pleasure. So it motivates further for self-study. Then it also helps the person to become autonomous. Because here you're not taking any aid. You're not dependent on the teacher. You're not even dependent on your parent. It's something which comes from within. You're indulging in an act that gives you pleasure. And therefore you become autonomous, you become independent, you become independent learners. And at the same time, you become more emphatic. Here again, what does Donay says? He says neuroscientific and social science studies have shown that people who read literary fiction extensively are more emphatic. People who read novels about other people who are very different from themselves and their backgrounds are particularly emphatic. So this is what Donne has found in his research, and therefore we can say that there are pretty lot of benefits of extensive reading. I myself, on a personal note, I would like to share that as a child, I indulged in a lot of extensive reading, and that's how I got into, literature and language, because my parents always, they never restricted my choices. Whatever I wanted to read, I was given an opportunity. I was, allowed to read, allowed to dabble in whichever genre that I wanted to, and it really benefited. This is from my personal experience. Now, moving on to the principles of intensive reading. Again, this is a very interesting way. I found out this Malay, I don't know how to pronounce, Shaboy. It's her, take on this. You can see on the left hand side, there's an acronym that has been used, OPQRSTU. So what are the principles of intensive reading? First is overview, where you survey or skim. In the introduction I had talked about skimming, scanning. So that is used here. You survey or you skim. There's an overview, decide upon the text that is to be, driven into. Then you plan a purpose. That is, how should the comprehension be? You go into the nitty-gritties of language. You go into the nitty-gritties of meaning. Then the next is questions. You formulate questions which are answered throughout the text. Formulating questions is now, it is assumed that the author is answering something. That's how we go about, doing intensive reading. We pose questions. When we are going into intensive reading, why exactly do we pick up text? Because we are looking for answers, right? For example, I'll again give my example. When I was trying to look, because language is basically, I am not into ELT, I am a literature person. So when I was giving this topic to, talk about, I had to particularly look for books. I had to look for material which was specifically talking about intensive reading and extensive reading. So I was looking for texts. I was looking for answers through the different materials. I was looking for answers through the different texts that I could locate. So I was posing questions. What all I wanted to know? I wanted to know the definition. I wanted to know what the principles were all about. I wanted to know what's the difference between both. So these were my questions, and I found my answers through the books that I went through. So again, you pose questions. For intensive reading, you have to pose questions. You have to formulate questions, which the answers you find through the text. Then the reading is, again, you can link the two because it is guided by purpose. Very careful thinking goes into intensive reading. There's a target. There's a target before you, and you are addressing that target. You have to go through it, and you are not, looking left or right. It's like the horse, you have that, what do you say? You have, the eyes are hidden, and you're going bulldozing into just one kind of reading, trying to look for material. There's a purpose behind it. Then you summarize. Intensive reading, you are summarizing whatever you grasp, whatever you accumulate, then you put it into, because your own understanding, what you have understood, what you have gained out of that reading, you summarize it. You put it in your own words, and you test yourself. Yeah, it's intensive reading has to, it's got a target, it's got a purpose, and you have to deliver the goods. So you have to make sure that how much have you been able to retain, how much have you been able to grasp, and how much of it can you deliver to your audience, or to the teacher, or during the examination, or during an interview. So that is one of the basic principles of intensive reading. And the final, of course, is all about understanding and comprehension, what you've understood through the text. And that again is not only about understanding the general meaning, but it is about a detailed analysis. You need to know not only an overall understanding of the text, but an in-depth reading, understanding everything. Like, for example, in case of literature, when I had said there can be layers and layers of meaning in literary text. You can read it in a theoretical way. You can read it from the point of view of sociology. You can read it from the point of view of the times that the writer was living and had written that particular text. You can look at it from the point of view of politics, what the political scenario was. You can look at it from the point of view of the historical perspective. So there are so many layers. So it is not just a basic understanding of an overall understanding of the text, but an in-depth comprehension which includes so many levels, as well as understanding of language, of vocabulary, of words, of meanings. So that's how the principles of intensive reading go about. Then coming to the benefits of intensive reading, some of the benefits of extensive and intensive reading overlap. Again, here the first point before your screens is it enhances your reading comprehension. Something similar to what the benefit of extensive reading is. Of course, you understand the text better. Helps students understand sentence structure and developing critical thinking. This is one major difference from extensive reading. This is a couple of steps ahead because you are understanding the structure. You're going into the basic, understanding of syntax, of how language is being constructed, what kind of grammar is being used, what kind of, when you're writing, what kind of, where the question mark goes, where the comma goes, all that comes into a comprehensive understanding of when we do intensive reading. Also, it encourages our critical thinking. We look beyond the text that we are reading. We just look beyond the word. In case of extensive reading, you're just looking at the word lightly, just the text as it is, just getting a superficial meaning, enjoying it, and moving forward. But in case of intensive reading, if your critical, and the analytical capacity is developed, then it improves the power of expression. Yes, when you do intensive reading, because when you become confident about the meanings of the words, automatically your expression improves. In case of extensive reading, there are many words that you're skipping. There are many grammatical connotations that you're skipping, okay? And therefore, when you have to deliver the goods, maybe you're not all that good, maybe you're not all that confident. But in case of intensive reading, once you've done that, your skill of expression improves. Then it also helps you to develop skill of questioning and answering. Again, because understanding, comprehension has reached to such a level that you can have a very meaningful conversation with the opposite party. You can have a very beneficial, a positive interactive session with your colleagues or with your fellow students, or for that matter, even with your teachers. You become more confident because the word meanings, the sentence structure, there are so many, the technicalities, you've overcome that hurdle. You are confident about your speech, your expression, and therefore you become better at questioning and answering. Then lastly, you can see it encourages students to look into the details of the text. Again, details of the text is extremely important when you have to prepare for an exam, you have to prepare for an interview. Then extensive reading is not going to help you. For that, we need to get into our texts very intensively, because there is a possibility of a cross-questioning. There's a possibility of people who are there before you who will ask you, question you about whatever you have read. It's a kind of a test, and for that, intensive reading is a must. Now, I can see, I think I'm almost running out of time, so I'll quickly go through these strategies. There are a few strategies that are used for to help readers read. One is scanning. I'll quickly say what is scanning. Scanning is when you have you are looking for a particular material. For example, if you're doing history and you're looking for Akbar, so in your text you'll be looking only for Akbar. Whatever is related to Akbar, you'll read that. Or maybe you're looking for a particular date, you're looking for a particular event, you'll only focus on that and accumulate your knowledge about it. Skimming is again where maybe you'll read the first paragraph, of a text, you'll read the last paragraph of a text and the concluding paragraph of text, and read maybe the first line, or in between you'll quickly skim over to get an idea of what the text is talking about. And the third, now in these, scanning and skimming is something which is applicable and used both in the case of extensive reading as well as intensive reading. But the third strategy, the in-depth reading, this is specifically for intensive reading. I have already talked enough about it. I don't think I need to repeat it here. The next three points, strategies before you, Professor Elango had also mentioned these in the, beginning of, on the inaugural session yesterday. He had talked about the SQ3R. This is one of the very interesting strategies that is used. And as you can see before your screen, it's very clear. S stands for survey, question, read, recite, and review. But to take it a little further ahead, there were researchers, there were language teachers who looked into this, and they improved upon it. We have the SQ4R, which is survey, question, read, recite, review, and reflect. And before that, we also add the component K, that is knowledge. Knowledge of what we are going to do. This is something you can associate to pre-questions, like you have the pre-questions you prepare before you go into intensive reading. So you add knowledge, and towards the end, you reflect upon what you have read. And after that, you have the SQ6R. I think it was Robinson. It was Williams. SQ4R was talked about. This is a technique which was talked about by another language expert, but this SQ6 was talked about by Williams in 2005, and he brought about a further modification of SQ4R technique, and here he called it the SQ6R, in which it was done to fit the reading of research literature. This especially interests me, SQ6R, because it is specifically focusing on researching and focusing on literature. And the steps, besides the other steps, the added steps that he added are rehash, rethink, and reevaluate. And this strategy opens up the eyes of the students about what it means to read carefully or intensively for research work. I hope these strategies are clear. Now, I would have liked to talk a little more about these strategies, but because we are running short of time, I'll quickly just conclude the session. Here, as we can see, reading is an important tool for learning, because reading is, you can say, the first step to becoming better speakers, to become better writers. The more you read, the more you learn, the more you become confident about your speaking skills as well as your writing skills. Then well-organized reading materials are useful tools to inculcate and promote reading habits. That is, of course, understood, because if you are reading very carefully, when as far as intensive reading is concerned, you have to decide upon what kind of materials are to be included. The focus has to be very clear, and it can be a very useful tool to improve and promote reading habits amongst young learners. Then a teacher needs to choose appropriate reading material to enable students to read effectively. Again, this is specifically important in case of intensive reading when you are doing a classroom teaching. There the teacher has to be very careful as to how he goes about handling his material, because if you try to take up the whole text intensively in one go, then you are surely going to demotivate your students. You have to be very careful. You have to see, you have to check as to students, where does their interest lie? What kind of material would they be interested in? What kind of material would engage their attention? Because once their attention is engaged, then they are surely going to become better readers as they move on going through that text. Then extensive reading initiates interest in young learners. Yes, of course, I gave you my own example. For most of us, I think it is extensive reading, whether it's magazines or whether it's newspapers or whether it's comics, that makes you better learners. And intensive reading, on the other hand, it makes you more efficient learners, because again, because all the technicalities are involved, you become the focus is pointed. in case of intensive reading, the kind of things that you pick up, the kind of mastery that you gain over language is far, far deeper, is far, far impactful in case of intensive reading. But if you just want to, I feel that this is a second step. But if we want to initiate young learners, if we want to inculcate the reading habits, then it is the extensive reading that we should begin with. And hopefully our young learners would be motivated to move on to the next step and become in-depth readers of serious texts as well. So thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation. I have left out a lot because intensive and extensive reading is a very wide topic, and it opens up to so many things. And the discussion can go on and on because there are many other strategies that can be looked into, but I have not gone into that because of the time constraints. But there are many, many more strategies, very interesting strategies that we can make use of in our classrooms to help our students or young learners to become better readers. So thank you very much for your patient listening. If there are any questions or queries, maybe Indepth could help me.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the lucid presentation. We thank you heartily for that. It's time to step into the question and the session. We have a question from Sanda, and this gets broadcasted. Would it be right today that the technical books call for more intensive reading, whereas non-technical books are more for extensive reading?
Yes, I think what you say is very correct, but I would just like to make a little point out a little difference of opinion as far as because me being a literature teacher, even the non-technical books, for example, literature is non-technical. If you look into theory, of course, when people talk about theories, then people talk about intensive reading. But if you look at school-going children, or even for that matter, college-going students, our texts, our literary texts, they are non-technical. But at the same time, you need intensive reading in order to gain in-depth knowledge. There are so many things which are part of literature, which are non-technical. But at the same time, you need to have an intensive reading about it if you want to absorb the ideas of the author, if you want to understand the socio-political background, if you want to understand the historical perspective of the given text. I hope it answers.
Thank you for that, ma'am. And we have got the second question from Shyam. It's not intensive and extensive reading subjective, meaning that it depends on the interest of the reader.
Of course, as far as extensive reading is concerned, it does depend upon the reader's choice, because initially in my presentation, I had said that extensive reading is all about your personal choice. And, you take from there. But in case of intensive reading, it's not always the personal choice, because it's something that you might be doing with a certain target in your mind. And it is something which the class teacher would, decide as to which text, which areas are to be concentrated upon. So I do not fully agree with that. Intensive reading is something that has to be, because intensive reading again is not necessary that arouses a person's interest towards reading. And if we look at our the main idea of this whole FDP is to initiate reading, to inculcate reading habits, good reading habits in people. So if you look at it that way, then it's extensive reading that we should concentrate upon more in case of young learners. Once you are into it reading, then when your topics are decided, when your field is decided, then it is intensive reading that you're going to indulge in, and it's your teachers, it's the curriculum that is going to decide what kind of text you're going to look at.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the insights. And here we have come across clear illustrations. And though there was a brief disruption, did not affect the presentation anyway. And so the interconnectedness between intensive and extensive reading, that was the catch of the day. And also the speaker threw light on the strategies for different kinds of reading. Thank you. Thank you for the lucid presentation, ma'am. Thank you a lot.
Thank you so much, Indusoodan, and I must thank the platform of ELTAI for inviting me over for this talk. I hope I will be able to do justice, because as I had said earlier, I am not a person of ELT. I am a person of, I'm focusing on literature. So I'm a teacher of literature, basically. Of course, language and literature cannot be separated now. That's a different, you can get into a debate upon that. But for, the technical purpose, this was something I think I learned through this opportunity that I got. I myself learned a lot. So thank you once again, ELTAI, Professor Ilango, and our president, Dr. Sanjay Arora, for this offering me this platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the day.
Good day.
And